And here we are again, finally to learn something new. Today's objective is to learn to evaluate expressions with rational exponents. So for you to know how to do that, the first thing you need to do is you need to remember roots. So let's talk first about roots. What you know is you know square root. The square root means what times what that's the same makes the number underneath the square root. So for 16, you'd ask yourself, what times what makes 16? And you all know that it's 4 times 4. That's why the square root of 16 equals 4. For the square root of 81, you ask yourself what times what that's the same makes 81, and that's 9 times 9. So the square root of 81 is 9. And then for 49, you could do it in your brain. What times what that's the same makes 49, and that's 7. So the square root of 49 equals 7. Notice how for square roots we're asking ourselves what happens twice, but there's no number in here. So what you would envision is that in here would be the number 2. So to make it more obvious, you could say that's the square root of 16. That's the square root of 81. Saying, what number can you multiply twice to make 16? What number can you multiply twice to make 81? And so on. But since square roots are so common, they don't put the number in there. When we see it without a number at all, we assume it's a square root, which means it's a number that happens twice. But you also need to know some other roots, and that's where the download that you have comes into play. For example, when you see this, first thing you need to know is how do you say it. You say that as 4th root of 16. That's how you say it. What it means is what number that's the same can you multiply 4 times to make 16? And that number is 2. Because 2 times 2 makes 4, times another 2 makes 8, times another 2 makes 16. That's why the 4th root of 16 equals 2. The next one we have on there is the cube root of 64. Written like this, set as cube root of 64. And what it's asking you is, what times what times what, that's all the same, makes 64. And that happens to be 4. Because 4 times 4 is 16, times another 4 makes 64. So the cube root of 64 equals 4. The next example on the page is the square root of 49. Now we just talked about this. There's no number in here. When there's no number in here, it means you're thinking twice. So that's why for this one you're asking yourself, what times what that's the same makes 49, and that is 7 times 7, and that's why the square root of 49 equals 7. Next example we have is the cube root of negative 125. Now, when we did square roots and negative numbers, we had to go imaginary. But this is okay. The reason this is okay is because there are 3 numbers that if you multiply them, you get a negative. And that would be negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. And that's because negative 5 times negative 5 makes positive 25. But then when you multiply it to the next negative 5, it goes back to negative. So that's why the cube root of negative 125 equals negative 5. No i's needed.